Hello, Year 10, and welcome to um, a book that I thought you'd be interested in looking at and potentially engaging with. There's no set work required for this, there's no written expectations or even reading expectations with this, but I just thought this might be an interesting novel for you to explore during the current time, as it's highly likely that it's going to be something that's more referenced by people at the moment than it's been for a long, long time. In 1665, there was an outbreak of the Great Plague in London, and Daniel Defoe's writing Journal of the Plague Year 60 years later, and it's a remarkable novel. It is an actual novel as opposed to a non-fiction journal, and in this text, Defoe recreates a sense of what might have been happening in London at the time. There is a fictional narrator and there's some thought that it's based on Defoe's uncle, and we go through London at this time with this fictional narrator as he tries to maintain both his sanity and his physical well-being during what's happening. And I think it is remarkable of the similarities between this outbreak in the 17th century and what we're experiencing now in terms of what Defoe talks about. So we're not so much talking about the nature of the diseases itself, but we're talking about the reaction of people to an outbreak of an infectious disease and how scared they are, how certain people behave. And if you are to read this whole book, then I think you'll see some of those certain behaviours coming across. It's a really extraordinary thing. So I thought I'd just guide you through the first section of the book, just really very much the first page, and then an example of these statistics. So just to go through the bullet points I've made, as you can see, Defoe, well known for his extraordinary early novels, Robinson Crusoe and Moll Flanders. Many novels in this early period of the English novel are given names, so to create this sense of autobiography, this sort of quasi-real status. The word novel is derived from the newspapers at the time, which were called nues, and therefore lots of early novels are written in first-person narratives and purport to be real. You can download the book free from something called Project Gutenberg, which is an extraordinary website dedicated to making certain key texts in I suppose, Western literature and wider available to people for free. I've attached a link to you in the Guardian Book Club, which you can join in with and follow along with other people reading the novel. And again, it's just a really interesting thing to do. That's also got a link to Project Gutenberg in it. As it says, it's 1665 is the time the plague occurred. The book is written in the 18th century. So on the one hand, it's a work of recreative fiction. Defoe was only 5 at the time with a fictional narrator, but on the other hand, it uses real historical records and mortality statistics to locate the events firmly in reality. So this is the very opening of the novel, and this chapter is entitled Memoirs of the Plague. It was about the beginning of September 1664 that I, among the rest of my neighbours, heard in ordinary discourse that the plague was returned again in Holland, for it had been very violent there, and particularly at Amsterdam and Rotterdam in the year 1663, whither they say it was brought, some said from Italy, others from the Levant among some goods which were brought home by their Turkey fleet, others said it was brought from Canada, others from Cyprus. It mattered not from whence it come, but all agreed it was come into Holland again. We had no such thing as printed newspapers in those days to spread rumours and reports of things, and to improve them by the invention of men, as I have lived to see practised since. But such things as these were gathered from the letters of merchants and others who corresponded abroad, and from them was handed about by word of mouth only, so that things did not spread instantly over the whole nation as they do now. But it seems that the government had a true account of it, and several councils were held about ways to prevent its coming over, but all was kept very private. Hence it was that this rumour died off again, and people began to forget it as a thing we were very little concerned in, and that we hoped was not true, till the latter end of November or the beginning of December 1664, when 2 men said to be Frenchmen died of the plague in Long Acre, or rather at the upper end of Drury Lane. The family they were in endeavoured to conceal it as much as possible, but as it had gotten some vent in the discourse of the neighbourhood, the Secretaries of State gat knowledge of it, and concerning themselves to inquire about it, in order to be certain of the truth, 2 physicians and a surgeon were ordered to go to the house and make inspection. This they did, and, finding evident tokens of the sickness upon both the bodies that were dead, they gave their opinions publicly that they died of the plague, whereupon it was given in to the parish clerk, and he also returned them to the hall, and it was printed in the weekly bill of mortality in the usual manner thus: Plague 2, parishes infected, 1. And then the other element of the novel I want to show you from a little later on in the same chapter, Defoe gives the real mortality statistics of people dying in the different London parishes, and over the course of the novel, one of the sort of horrifying aspects of it is how these numbers increase enormously over the course of the text, and therefore it's this statistical interest, isn't it, and focus that we find in a pandemic, which is as much true in the 17th century as it was and is in the 21st, how the daily death rate has become the statistic we all look at, desperately hoping that the statistics of mortality, that the statistics of hospital admissions and people in intensive care units drop. So it's remarkable, isn't it, that these similar qualities are still the sort of focus of the human imagination during a pandemic. I suppose we try and quantify something which is abstract and terrifying to us, and think about how much more abstract and terrifying disease must have been to a 17th century audience and experiencer than it is now. To go back to look at the text itself, one of the remarkable things that I think he talks about is the nature of technology of spreading news. Defoe talks about there's no printed newspapers at the time, and now how these things have improved, and therefore he talks about how so that things did not spread instantly over the nation as they do now. Now, how extraordinary that he talks about the sense of things spreading instantly. So I think, the media that we have at the time is what we consider to be instantaneous and to be overwhelming. And whereas now, we really do have extraordinary instant information. But in another 500 years, we'll look at what we consider to be instant, and it will be nothing like how news and technology is spread in the future. And similarly, that's what Defoe talks about here. Then again, you see this phrase, the government had a true account of it. And again, this is a classic thing, isn't it, where people believe that the government knows things, that they know the reality of what's going on, but all was kept very private. Several councils were held about ways to prevent its coming over. So several councils means meetings, in the same way that the government is holding COBRA meetings and meetings of an organisation called SAGE, the scientific advisors, to prevent its coming over. And then it gives this very specific example of 2 people dying of the plague in a family house. The family therein endeavoured to conceal it as much as possible. So again, how people find out about these things, and then again, 2 physicians and a surgeon, so doctors at the time, are ordered to make inspection and check whether or not this is the true case. It's a beautifully written novel. It's an extraordinary piece of historical fiction, and in this extraordinary time, this is one of the most relevant texts about how people feel about the human experience of what we're all going through. And I thought that this might be an interesting thing for you to have a look at, even if you don't read the whole thing. Perhaps just watching this video, I hope makes you think about going to look at some other literature of this nature. And I think everyone in this class would find it very interesting to have a look at. As I say, think about the nature of this book. It's something that relates to human condition and the human experience during a pandemic. And I certainly have found it, though frightening and though in many ways very depressing, also a consolation in some ways, because Defoe talks about people feeling as scared and frightened, including himself, as I am, as I'm sure many people are. And I suppose that expression sort of justifies that fear, justifies that worry, and if we can justify these fears, then I think we can face them, deal with them, and look forward to the next part of our lives. I think that's one of the things that great literature does. Anyway, I hope everyone's well, and I hope that, as ever, your loved ones and family are well, and very much looking forward to working with you all this week and seeing some more of your really, really exceptional work. Thanks, everyone. Take care. Bye.